We're about to get this session underway. We've titled this session, the last session before lunch, The Consequences of Inaction in Syria, and we've got a great set of speakers. Before I turn it over to Bob Kagan, I just want to remind everyone that you can follow us today on Foreign Policy I on Twitter, and we're using the hashtag FPI Forum if you want to tweet questions, and we'll take a number of questions from Twitter and from people watching on C-SPAN. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Kagan, who's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and also one of FPI's board of directors. So, Bob?
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you all for being here to discuss this extremely important topic. I must say my own view of things is that if the French are ready to go, we should go. That's my rule of thumb in foreign policy. And in that regard, I think it's both mystifying and shameful that the Americans are so far behind on this issue that they are once again letting the French lead the way. But I wish I was more confident that the Americans were actually following in this case. But in any case, that'll be the subject of our discussion today. Syria. What to do, why we aren't doing more, what outcomes we might want to see in Syria, what are the methods to get there. And it's almost literally impossible to imagine two people better suited to having this discussion. Sitting next to me is our old friend, a living institution in the United States, the leader of foreign policy thought in the Senate, and I guess I would say in Washington. I won't go through his whole distinguished biography because you all know Senator John McCain. Well, I'll save that. I'll do it afterwards, or I'll send it around to anybody who wants to see it. But it's really a pleasure to have you here again. Thanks, at FPI. And it's also a great pleasure and honor to welcome Bernard-Henri Lévy to FPI and to have this discussion. He is also someone who needs no introduction, but I think since American audiences may not be as familiar as they ought to be, despite his best-selling book about America called American Vertigo, which I think is based on the Hitchcock movie. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
But he's also been, he's a philosopher, he's a thought leader, and he has put himself frequently in harm's way in the most noble of causes. And one of his other books is called La Guerre sans les Mais, which I believe translates to War Without Love, which is about his time in Libya, which was a kind of, it's a literary diary inspired by his actions during the war in Libya. He's the director of a review called La Règle de Jeu, which I believe is called The Rules of the Game, which is based on the Renoir film. So there's a movie theme here. But in any case, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us to talk about Syria. Let me just start by asking Senator McCain, because you're in frequent contact with the U.S. administration, there was some speculation, I think, I don't know what it was based on, during the campaign that President Obama and the administration in general were reluctant to take action on Syria while he was running for office on a theme of, the receding of war, and a hope and an expectation that after the election, then they would begin to put some steps in place. And we did have Secretary Clinton and the effort to build a new Syrian opposition group. Do you see a new movement in the administration on this issue?
Well, I certainly saw an effort to organize better the Syrian resistance, and Secretary Clinton and others in the administration played a very active role in that effort. I'm also hearing from their usual source, they send their information out through the New York Times, as you know, that we're now going back to try to convince the Russians to. I thought we'd fairly well exhausted that avenue, which was, of course, a blind alley to start with. But I've still not seen any indication that the United States would take the active leadership role that, frankly, the entire Middle East is crying out for. I just have not seen that yet. I hope it will happen. I pray that it will happen. We're now up to 40,000 and climbing. And of course, as all of these kinds of civil wars or conflicts go, they escalate and the atrocities get worse and the bombing and the things that were never contemplated or seen early in this uprising are now basically tactics of war. And the thing that bothers me more than anything else, Bob, I agree that someday Bashar al-Assad will fall. We've been saying that now for 20 months, something like that. But in the meantime, what carnage will take place between now and then? Because every time there seems to be a modest escalation on the side of assisting the resistance, there is an escalation by the Iranians, by the Russians, by the formation of this now group. I forgot now what they call themselves, a paramilitary organization they're trying to form up. So I kind of see steps of escalation with the resistance making some progress, but a long, long way from victory.
The administration's, you can't tell whether the administration's insistence on going to the Security Council and getting Security Council authorization is a way of being very sincere in its desire to get a Security Council authorization to move forward, or whether it's a way of hiding behind the Security Council and not taking action. But let me ask you, Monsieur Lévy, what did you, in France, I think the American assumption is that the French would agree that you can't do anything without a Security Council resolution. I'm wondering what your view on that is, given that at the moment, and really for quite some time now, it seems very unlikely that the Russians would approve any serious action to overthrow Assad. What is your view of how important it is to go to the Security Council, whether we should be dissuaded if we can't get a resolution?
Let me tell you first how, just one word, how honored I am to sit next to Senator McCain. Senator McCain embodies for me and for many Frenchmen one of the most noble things in the world, which is physical bravery, physical courage. And I remember 4 years ago, I was very embarrassed. I had a vested interest in Barack Obama's campaign because I predicted 4 years before that he could be an American president, so I was for him. But I had a real embarrassment when I saw the performance and the bravery of Senator McCain. And for me, it's a big treat to be here with you and to discuss with you.
I'd like you to come out to Arizona with me sometime.
2016.
So that's the point I wanted to make. About the United Nations, how important it is. Of course it would be great to have United Nations. Of course it would be better. But please, if United Nations was a moral authority, then it would be indispensable to have it. We could not do it without. But United Nations is so corrupt, morally corrupted. They accepted so many bloodbaths in the 20th century. They closed their eyes on Bosnia. They closed their eyes on Rwanda. We cannot take shelter under the veto of Security Council in order not to do anything. This is really an alibi. It is an excuse. There are a lot of people in France and in America who are very pleased of this veto. It's very comfortable to be able to say, we would love to go, but there is this moral authority, this anti-gun law of Security Council. This is a joke. And what I can tell you is that I remember so well the first day when Nicolas Sarkozy received the transitional authority of the Libyan people, the NTC, in Palais de l'Élysée. I was here. I took the three guys, Ali Zaidan, Prime Minister today, Mahmoud Jibril, Ali Al-Essawi, to Nicolas Sarkozy's office. Nicolas Sarkozy exposed to them his plan to prevent the bloodbath in Benghazi. They were very happy, and one of them, Ali Zaidan, asked, but Mr. President, what if you don't have the endorsement of United Nations? Nicolas Sarkozy made the following reply. He said, number one, I will have the endorsement because I'm very strong, I'm very voluntary, I will have. But if I don't have the endorsement, I will do without, because you have situations in history of humanitarian emergency where there is, of course, the laws, but also the law. And Sarkozy said, if ever by mischance I did not get the endorsement, then we would build, there is other organizations, regional, you have Arab League, you have African Union, you have NATO, you have European Unions. I would build with my friend David Cameron, this is the quote of Nicolas Sarkozy this day, we will build a sort of substitutional, of legitimacy of substitution to deal with this moral emergency which we are facing. So it will be the same about Syria. If we can, of course. The proof is made that we are hijacked, that the human rights are hijacked by Mr. Putin, the great democrat of Chechnya, the man who erased 3/4 of Grozny. He is entitled apparently to say what human rights is and what defense of human rights should be. This is a terrible joke. And we have to, I think that the only decent thing to do would be to proceed without that.
And let me just ask you, just following up on that, what is your view of, because I asked Senator McCain, what is your view of American policy right now? I mean, what's your opinion of it, and also how do you explain it?
My view on American policy in Libya, I think that America did well. France took the lead, but America did well. I think I had a few an inside view of the story, and I can say that America was saved, the honor of America was saved by a president, of course, Obama, but by three women. Samantha Power, Susan Rice, and Hillary Clinton. I happen to be the one who took Mahmoud Jibril to Paris in March, when there was this meeting of the G8, when Hillary Clinton was in Paris to see Nicolas Sarkozy and Alain Juppé. And Mahmoud Jibril, who was transitional prime minister of Libya, had a face-to-face meeting with future Ambassador Christopher Stevens, who was not yet ambassador. He was there. There was a meeting face-to-face between Jibril and Hillary Clinton. And my belief, and my feeling and my belief is that a great deal of the story happened during these 45 minutes. There was two persons, a man and a woman, a heart speaking to another heart, a great plea of Mahmoud Jibril addressed to a mother, to a humanitarian militant who is Hillary Clinton. And when Jibril went out of the office, I think that Hillary Clinton was really impressed, moved. Then there was this conversation overseas between Gates, Clinton and Obama, and so on. So Clinton, Rice, Samantha Power, they did a great job. And of course, President Obama and the whole administration followed very bravely. Today, about Syria, I must confess that I don't understand. During the campaign, one could understand. There was a special context, there was the electoral fight and so on. But now, what prevents? Opposite to what is generally said, it is more doable today against Assad than it was 2 years ago against Gaddafi. All those who tell us, but you can't say that, Syria is very difficult, very complicated, they lie. It is much doable. A war is never easy, and it is always tragic, and the collateral effects are always dramatic. But as soon as this is said, it is more doable today in Syria than it was doable yesterday in Libya. And I could explain why later.
Could I make just 2 points? One is that all the things that the non-interventionists said would happen if we intervened have now happened in Syria. The influence and dramatic increase in al-Qaeda presence, the escalation of bombing, the tensions on the borders, all of the things that were predicted that would happen if we intervene are now happening, and in spades. And again, it cries out for American leadership. But I think that we also must view this situation in Syria in the broader context of the entire upheaval that's taking place in the Middle East, and especially the role of Iran. Iran are the missiles that were in Gaza. It was Iran who was sending in the Revolutionary Guards on the ground that are training this new paramilitary force. And believe me, in warfare, there's nothing more atrocious than these kinds of paramilitary forces. It's the Iranians that continue to have the centrifuges spinning. It's the Iranians that are even influencing al-Qaeda or other extremist groups throughout the region, and continuing to provoke and to plot even assassinations here in our nation's capital. So I think when we look at Syria, we also have to look at the effect of the fall of Bachar on Iran, and also what Iran will continue to do, not just in Syria, but, for example, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Suppose that they decide to trigger these missiles, which would overwhelm Iron Dome. There's so many things, moving parts in the region, and so much of it can be traced back to the number one spoiler in the region on top of the Arab Spring, and that is the Iranian meddling in literally every part of the Middle East.
Well, let's talk about then what should be done. What's your current view on what we ought to be doing?
The no-fly zone, which, by the way, does not mean that we go after Bashar's air defenses. It means that we place anti-air missiles in place, and I guarantee you, first Syrian aircraft we shot down, that would be the last one to fly over a no-fly zone. A place where they can, a Benghazi where they can organize, where they can train, where they can equip, where we can find out who the good guys and the bad guys are in this effort to form a revolutionary council that will be effective, and also, frankly, to counter what is the increasing influence of al-Qaeda and extremists who are pouring in from all over the Middle East. The longer this goes, the more likely we're going to have enormous challenges with these kinds of... It'll be the militias in Libya magnified by a factor of 10. So then obviously it would be nice if we had the United Nations, but I really believe that, one, Americans are war weary, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. But we could prevail with the kind of equipment that they need, and training and organization. Right now they have no place to organize.
Are you talking about giving anti-aircraft weapons to the opposition, or are you talking about emplacements in Turkey, or what?
We could do some of the above. I think Patriot missiles, as now the Germans are moving some Patriot missiles under some kind of weird circumstances, but at least they're coming into Turkey. Or we could give them a limited number, a controlled number of man pads. But primarily, I think it would just be a Patriot installation. Pilots are not going to fly into certain death. I don't care how brave they are. And you shoot down one or two of them, they're not going to fly there again. They may like Bashar Assad, but they like to live a little more.
Is Turkey ready to play that role?
Again, everybody I talk to in Turkey and in the region, it cries out for American leadership. I think that the Turks are having significant public opinion problems. They're overwhelmed by huge numbers of refugees. They see this thing continuing. We're going to have, my friends, the next big challenge in the Middle East is the ambitions of the Kurds for a Kurdish state. And the longer this kind of situation prevails, the more that they're going to have their ambitions. They're in Syria, they're in Iraq, they're in Iran. They're everywhere. They're in Turkey, as you know. So I think that, it's very obvious that we can, the sooner we get this thing moving in the right direction, the better. But I worry about Erdogan. I worry about his ambitions. I worry about his comments. He took himself out of the negotiations on the Gaza thing by his comments about Israel. One thing I can assure all of us, and I'm totally confident of, is we didn't know what the world in the Middle East was going to look like 2 years ago, or a little over 2 years ago, when all these other guys were in power. We cannot predict what the world is going to be, Middle East is going to be like 2 years from now, except that it cries out for American leadership. And that's what, in my view, and I hate to be partisan when I say this, but it is missing there. It is missing. And when I talk to all of these leaders, whether they be Gulf leaders or any place else in the Middle East, they want American leadership.
Do you have other thoughts you wanted to add to what ought to be done? And do you have a view as to whether, I mean, you know, if an administration official were sitting here, they would say, A, Erdogan talks a good game, but he doesn't really want to do anything in Syria for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, including the Kurdish thing. B, we don't want to give anti-aircraft weapons to people because we don't know what happens to them after they've used them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That all these things, I've heard the phrase non-starter, everything's a non-starter, and that's why they go to the Security Council.
You know, the question is not will Assad fall? Assad will fall. The question is, will Assad fall with the help of the West or without the help of the West? This is the crucial question. If Assad falls in a few weeks, in a few months, without the help of the West, then it will be an affair between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It will be a fight between Qatar and the allies of Guards of Revolutions, and so on. If it is with the West, then, number one, we will do our duty of Democrats. We will have the flag of our values high. And number two, we will have our word to say in the future of this area. Look at what happens in Libya today. Egypt, Tunisia, Libya. It's a common place to say that things don't go so well in Egypt and in Tunisia, which is true. Muslim brothers are on power in Egypt, women are not in such a good situation in Tunisia, and so on. Look at what happens in Libya. In Libya, the Muslim brothers lost the elections in last July. The secular and moderate Muslims won. The prime minister is Mr. Ali Zaidan, who is a true Libyan patriot, but who is also a friend of the West, a friend of Europe, a friend of America, a true human rights fighter. He was the president of the Human Rights League for 20 years and so on. So what is the difference between Libya on one side and Egypt and Tunisia on the other side? The difference, one of the differences, is that the Libyans did the job with the help of the West. They know that the key argument of Al-Qaeda, which is the West is against us, the West is devil, America is the grand devil, and so on, is false. They know that the West is not the eternal ally of the dictators. And this reshaped completely the way of thinking of a lot of average people in Libya. The grass has been cut under the feet of the Islamists and of the Al-Qaeda. The key argument was the West is the enemy of the peoples. No, in Libya, the West was the friend of the people. They gave the hand and they were helpful. So in Syria, it is the same, but it is late. It is 40,000 dead too late. But nevertheless, it is still time. It is still time to show to the youth of Syria that we hear their appeal to liberty, that we are able to listen to their call for human rights.
But let me just say about Libya. Everything you say I totally agree with, except for the fact that we abandoned Libya. The light footprint. They needed all kinds of help, which they could pay for. They needed help with securing their borders. They needed help with setting up a police and army force. They needed to help with disarming these militias, which are still roaming around. We watched the deterioration in the eastern part of Libya. We watched it. We saw the threats to our embassy. We saw the al-Qaeda elements coming in. 10 different al-Qaeda affiliated groups are around Benghazi as we speak. We watched it happen because we didn't do the things that we knew were necessary to assist them to set up the first government that they've ever had. And we obviously paid a very heavy price for it.
And we watched great Ambassador Stevens being killed in such a savage way, probably linked to what you are saying. Of course, that is true. That is true, but that is not a reason not to intervene. That is a reason to change the move even in Libya. I think that, for example, America and France...
Could I just say, I think that's why the follow-up is always so important. Help the Syrians, but then realize that the international community has a lot to do.
Unfortunately, you are not in office.
Yeah.
I will never be. But if we were, there is, for example, a project which I happened to propose it recently to President Hollande. America could be a partner of that, to build in Benghazi or in Tripoli a real institute of leaders, of building of leaders, according to local views, of course, according to what is a Muslim country, but with democratic value. A sort of national school of leaders in a country where, in Libya, you have 42 years without any state, without any civil society, and not even a nation. So ground zero of policy. We could follow up, of course, for example, with that. We have in France a school called École Nationale d'Administration, Administration National School, something like that. This would be a great partnership between America and France, could be built in Benghazi. And I'm sure that they would take. The Libyan leaders would be more than happy of this sort of help.
And they need a police force and an army.
Well, I just want to follow up on that a little bit and pull back the lens somewhat because, you know, we have the honor of having you here, and it gives us an opportunity to hear from you how the U.S. is viewed these days, both in France and in the and in Europe more broadly. You know, you raised a question. You know, does the United States are we working closely enough with Europe on these kinds of issues? Do you sense a strong alliance? Is there a perception of whether America is on its way up or on its way down? I'm just curious to get your view of how America appears right now.
There is one thing which was noticed in Europe in the acceptance speech of President Obama a few weeks ago, which is that the word Europe was not uttered once in his speech. He did not say Europe. So I don't know, is that a bad sign or not? I leave it to Europe. I hope not. I hope the current administration knows that whatever is a stake on the West, whatever is the emergency of dealing with Chinese things and so on, there is a link of flesh and of blood and of values between America and Europe. I hope this is well understood in America. In Libya, it seemed yes. I hope it will be in the next situations. I don't know.
I understand our emphasis on the Asia-Pacific region, the world's economy, China, all of those things. But when they use the word pivot, then that's a very serious error in my view. And I think it's kind of coincidental the president was in Asia when obviously Gaza and Israel were on the brink of an all-out conflict. I think that I would strongly advise our national security people in the administration to say that we want to balance. We don't want to pivot. We want to balance. We understand that Asia-Pacific region is very important. God knows, look at the Chinese just landed an aircraft on an aircraft carrier. There's no greater signal of a desire to have a nation that can project power than an aircraft carrier. I say that with some parochialism, obviously, but we have to understand that there's got to be a worldwide leadership, and we can't focus all of our attention on one region. And I hope that the recent upheaval in the Middle East has convinced the administration of that.
Okay, well, let me turn it over to our audience for some questions. I think people are walking around with mics. Also, I think I was supposed to say that you can tweet questions, or somebody can tweet. I'm the wrong guy to talk to about any of that stuff. Okay. Yeah, sure.
My name is François Brenne. I'm French, but I'm living in the States, and I'm proud to be part of the two nations. We know, Mr. Lévy, that because you had very close relationship with President Sarkozy, you have played a key role into the action in Libya, and that's a great thing. And we'll have the opportunity tonight to see your movie about that. I don't know how close you are with current President Hollande. My question is, to be very direct, because French people are not very well known to being politically correct. If today we cannot intervene in Syria, as we have been intervening with success in Libya, is it mainly because nobody can really pay the price? And I think it relates well to the theme of the day, the price of greatness. And in that case, nobody can pay the price because actually it wouldn't be a cash payment, but put on a credit card, and nobody can afford that in the Western world, either France, either the States.
It's probably one of the reasons, but the price to pay will be much higher if we don't do. It will be a price to pay in terms of terrorism. It will be a price to pay, as Senator McCain said at the beginning, in terms of reinforcement of Iran. It will be a price to pay in terms of reinforcement of Hezbollah and Hamas. The price to pay will be huge if we are not able today to pay the price of helping the fall of Bachar al-Assad. And you know, about Libya, it's very easy today to say that it was easy at this time. It was very difficult too. It was a completely obscure situation. Nobody knew how much it would cost. The cost was much higher than it was expected. It took many more months than it was announced. The victory was not sure. Gaddafi was not alone. The Russians did endorse at the beginning, but they very soon thought that they had been abused, and so on. So it was a very difficult matter, very costly, but I think it was a big cost to afford in order to avoid a huger price in the future. Same for Syria. If we don't do it today, we will have, as the famous word said, the shame plus the cost in the near future.
I think we could have accelerated the downfall of Gaddafi if we had continued to use U.S. air power, but that's, I regret that, but there's nothing that can be done about it. But I do thank the French and our British friends for the enormous effort they made. And I think the administration also deserves credit, is that we have provided a lot of the areas of support, such as refueling, such as additional weapons, such as intelligence capability, and many other things that our French and British allies and others did not have. And it was that part of our contribution was really vital.
Okay, over here.
Good morning. My name is Bridget, and I'm actually from Arizona, so nice to see you again, Senator. My question has to do with more of the other parts of the Middle East. I think that, well, maybe not me personally, but do you think the world community is more hesitant to get involved with Syria because of the collapse of other states around it? So if, say, we intervened in Syria, what if there was a revolution in Yemen, which there were a lot of protests, or Oman, or in Iran, there's huge protests about the failing of their currency. Do you think that there's a possibility for the whole Middle East to change in, say, 5-10 years? Or do you think that this is more a motivation of, you know, Russia is playing a certain side versus the West? You know, any thoughts?
I think as far as the United States is concerned, it's a war weariness is a big factor. People are very weary. Iraq, Afghanistan, a fear of getting into a prolonged conflict, which perhaps the United States might escalate and become more involved than initially anticipated. It wouldn't be the first conflict that escalated in that fashion. So I think war weariness, the economy and jobs, but I also think that there is a rising amount of American public opinion that want us to do something about this slaughter. I really do. It's just antithetical to everything that America stands for and believes in. These stories are horrific. I wish every American could go to a refugee camp as Joe Lieberman and Lindsey Graham and I did and hear the stories. They're just so heartbreaking, and I think I'm fairly tough old guy, but it just breaks your heart. And so I think there is some momentum, but every day that goes by, then the solutions are going to be even more complicated. And I guess it was one of the Syrian leaders that said, after this is over, just as you said, that we're going to remember who helped us and who didn't. And the thing that bothers me more, as much as anything else, is this enormous influx of al-Qaeda and extremists that are pouring into Syria from all over the Middle East. It's going to makes it really difficult to set up. Look at the problems they're having in Libya with just what they've got to contend with. But again, I want to emphasize, the Middle East is changing and the world is changing. I don't think the Arab Spring is confined to the Middle East. I don't see how the Chinese can continue the way that they're on with this little group of people, and all the corruption and all the ways that people have of communicating with each other nowadays, and the ongoing scandals that we see. So I think not only are there going to be changes in the Middle East, I think there's going to be changes throughout the world, where people are going to want to assert and obtain their God-given rights. And I think that Putin's going to have difficulties in Russia. And where it all leads, I'm not exactly sure, but I promise you that 2 years from now, I hope we'll have this same kind of conversation, and we'll be looking at a very, very different world. The question is what leadership role does the United States and our allies and friends play in shaping this new world that's going to emerge in the 21st century?
All the way in the back over there. Yeah. The man who still has his hand up. Yep. Yes. Is that a man? I can't tell from here.
No, female.
If it's not, I apologize. I need to get these.
And I want to add, in the meantime, about the war weariness. It is true, but America, English and French did a big job, even, for example, in Afghanistan. I am infuriated when I see in the press, French press and sometimes American press, that Afghanistan is a disaster. It is not true. We did a great job in Afghanistan. Karzai, Abdullah, a lot. I was recently, even in Uzbin and Kapisa, there is a lot of villages, a lot of cities where people don't want the Taliban to be back. The American and special forces of French in Afghanistan allowed, for example, the chase and the success of the chase of bin Laden. So war weariness, of course, but we must not let us depressed by this defeatist propaganda who says that all that we did since 10 years was a disaster. Iraq was not good, of course, but Kosovo was not a disaster. It was a just war with a fair result. Libya was a just war with a good result. And Afghanistan, this should be said at this moment where hard decisions are at the edge of being taken, we achieved, and you achieved, you Americans especially, real results which are good for the future of the whole area, including Pakistan.
I think Senator McCain and I would even add Iraq to that. But,
Yes.
ma'am, I apologize.
No problem.
Please.
I'm Catherine Fitzpatrick. I write on Eurasian affairs. Senator McCain, I wanted to ask you, a lot of focus is on the U.S. about Syria, but what can the U.S. do to pressure Russia more? They supply the arms to Assad. Are we too dependent on Russia because of having the route to Afghanistan where we have to get our troops in and out? Have we become too dependent there that we can't pressure Russia sufficiently on this issue?
Well, as was discussed earlier, the Russian veto is more of an excuse for non-intervention than a reason. We went to Kosovo without UN Security Council endorsement. I think that if there is a significant lack of progress, it is on the reset. You look at what Putin is doing. He just kicked out the NGOs. There's a new definition of treason. Why in the world he would nullify the non-Lugar process, which is in Russia's benefit to get rid of nuclear materials. That every step he seems to be taking is more and more autocratic and a kind of a ambition to see the old near abroad of the Russian Empire. And I don't think that we're going to have another Cold War. I don't think we're going to have huge confrontations with Russia. But I think we have to understand that Putin is going to be there, or ambitions are to be there for the rest of his life and to have an autocratic regime that has a lot to do with corruption and kleptocracy. And that's one reason why I hope that, and I've been working as hard as I can, the House has already passed it, that we would pass the Magnitsky Bill. We pass the Magnitsky Bill, and it sends a signal back to Putin that this kind of behavior is not acceptable, at least as far as the United States of America is concerned.
Okay, we have time, I'm afraid, only for two more quick questions.
Which, by the way, as you know, is triggered by the repeal of Jackson-Vanik as part of the deal. Yeah, sorry.
We have time for two more quick questions, and I think I'll take the two, and then you guys can answer them. This gentleman, and I'll cut someone from over on this side, this gentleman right here. Yep.
Very much. Flavius Mihailus. Two questions. One on leadership. It seems that the key missing piece of the equation today on acting in Syria is the French president has changed. So would you think that President Hollande would have acted differently in Libya? And today, if we cannot have the leadership on the French side that we could have had with a different president, who could replace that leadership on the European side, for instance? Number two, I was a little bit perplexed by Mr. Lévy consideration that the UN on the moral principle we should act and the UN has failed. I think that argument could be also used by other countries and non-democratic countries that would define moral imperative in a different terms and then find their rationale to invade other countries. And if you take a step back, the idea of the United Nations is also to provide some order process on relations between countries and on interventions. And very quickly, on the premises that the UN is unable to act, what other forums or what other mechanism can we use? Can NATO, for instance, take over some of the role of the UN? And I think there's an interesting possible difference of perspective between the Europeans and the United Nations. An ambassador recently told me that the UN congressman or senator told him that he saw the NATO as a toolbox to solve problems, and I think the Europeans are more cautious about how do we expand the role of NATO, and so that how do you see that play out as a possible replacement of the United Nations to find some legitimacy and a context to act abroad? Thank you.
And if you could just hold off, and let me just get the other question, and then we can.
Thank you, sir. Nelson Garcia with the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group. We are placed in a situation where Western intervention, while very positive and while very good in Libya and Syria, I could see us in a position down the road where it actually backfires on us, because the question will then be asked, why aren't we intervening in allied countries like Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia in promoting Western values? How do you address that situation, and are there differences between our approaches between the two governments, besides the fact that one is anti-American versus one being a pro-American government?
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lévy, why don't you answer this question, and then we'll turn to Senator McCain to answer that question.
About President Hollande and President Sarkozy, you are right. In Libya, it has been in great part a question of persons. That is true. And it was amazing for me. I can bear testimony for a few episodes of this story. It was amazing to see how much these questions of persons, of who is in charge, of who does what, was important. And the film, which I hope you will see tonight, which is a diary of these 10 months, of what was done, of how it was done, how it was acted, shows that in a very clear way. The person, the role. I remember when I was a Marxist in my youth, we used to say history with a big H, men do not count, they are just the puppet of history, and so on. The proof is done definitively that it is the opposite. The men do history. When they want, where there is a will, where there is a courage to act, things can be done. And this Libya story is really emblematic of that. I hope you will take consideration of that when you see at the French Embassy, I think tonight, French Embassy, my Oath of Tobruk. Number two, Hollande. The game is not over, and the mess is not said. Let's wait. François Hollande was elected a few months ago. He had to take time to put his feet in the new steps of a president. I don't know if Hollande would have acted as Sarkozy, but I'm sure that Sarkozy number one, the Sarkozy of the first year of the mandate, would not have done what he did after 4 years. The young Sarkozy, the new president, certainly would not have acted in Libya as he acted at the end. This is to say that I'm not sure at all that François Hollande will not be at the good level of acting and taking the lead. He shows signs since a few weeks of his ability to understand the question of Syria and to take the lead. One event which was rather unnoticed in America, which was his step in Beirut when he went to Saudi Arabia, was a great sign. This surprise stop in Beirut 4 weeks ago to say, in the name of France, don't touch Lebanon, as Mitterrand did in '82, as Chirac did after the death of Hariri, was a good thing. So let's wait. Maybe we will be, we, free world, and we, France, disappointed. Maybe not. About United Nations. I think that there will be in the next years a question of United Nations in general. I would advise my friends of foreign policy and of the think tank directed by my friend Bill Kristol to put that on the agenda of the next month, the question of United Nations. This organization which can accept that the Human Rights Committee is directed by Gaddafi at one time, by Pakistan at another time, that an organization of women can be directed and presided by a country which does not respect the equality and so on, is frankly problematic. So there is in general a question of United Nations. At the end of the day, you had the Société des Nations, which was replaced by United Nations. why should not there be an initiative coming from the civil society, from the government, maybe, to make a new path, to proceed, to change the rules? This is one general point. Failure in Rwanda, failure in Bosnia, failure in so many bloody wars in Africa, the forgotten wars of the 20th century, millions of dead. South Sudan, Blue Nile, Darfur, hundreds of thousands of unnamed, without grave, without archive, dead, with the absolute silence and indifference of United Nations. So there is a problem of failure, and we will have to deal in the next years with that. Now, of course, to act without United Security Council cannot be a law. We cannot pose as a law that it should be done without. It has to be done very carefully, it has to be done modestly, and it has to be done as an exception. When you have an emergency situation, sometimes you have to follow a law which contradicts slightly the laws. You have a great piece of literature which is one of the founding stone of our civilization, which is Antigone of Sophocles. And you have the law of Creon, and you have the law of Antigone. Sometimes the law of Creon is an outlaw law. Sometimes it is an unfair regulation, and sometimes you have to stand against. This is what the American administration, hand in hand with the French and English administration, should do in front of Mr. Putin and his new autocratic regime.
Well, Bob, I'd like to thank you and FPI for having me. You all do a great job, and those of you that haven't read his latest literary effort, I strongly recommend it. Has a lot to do with a blueprint and ideas and thoughts for America's role in the 21st century and beyond. I think your question, it touches on the really great challenge that we face in the 21st century. And as to where we intervene, where we don't intervene, under what circumstances, who do we support, how do we divert and expend our most valuable and precious assets, ranging from American blood to American treasure. I think, first of all, you have to, view America as still the indispensable nation. The 20th century was the American century, and I believe the 21st century can be as well. But I think there's a fundamental principle that I believe in, and that is that our interests are our values, and our values are our interests. And how we pursue those objectives is really going to be shaped by the nature of the challenge. Mr. Lévy just mentioned Africa today. What's going on today in the Congo is really just absolutely horrific. And yet the question is, what can we do effectively? You mentioned some of these other countries that are our friends and allies. We have to begin a process diplomatically of saying that they are going to have to show a greater respect for human rights, that they're going to have to show progress in democratization, freedom of the press, etc., all the things that we believe in and stand for. Not immediately. There can't be an overnight transition. But we have to expect that kind of progress from them. Otherwise, they will go the way of Mubarak, Ben Ali, Gaddafi, etc. And there's always the danger. Look at Iran. Iran is the classic example of we got rid of the rotten Shah, and we've been paying a very heavy price for it ever since. So it requires diplomacy, it requires understanding, it requires adjusting policies to the environment in which these various situations exist, and they will become more complex rather than less, but we have to base it on a fundamental set of principles, and that is that our values are their values, that our values are universal, that our belief that all of us are created with certain inalienable rights, And if we adjust those principles to the realities on the ground, then I don't think that we could ever really go very far wrong. When we go wrong, in my view, is when we look at the short-term situation rather than take the long view. And that's awfully easy to say and a lot harder to do. But without a bedrock set of principles for United States and European, and it's got to be more and more allied efforts, then we really don't have any blueprint as to how to assure a future of a globe that is changing in ways that I don't think we've seen. I keep trying to remember, as a student of history, I think maybe the Reformation in Europe, it was a period of upheaval, frankly, that is a little bit comparable to this one. But I believe in American leadership. I believe in the greatness of America. I believe that this president can lead. I believe that his Secretary of State, whoever that might be, can also lead. And I think it's important that we talk about these issues because I don't think the challenges have ever been greater either. I thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator. I have one quick sentence for President Obama. If he were sitting here, I don't have a Clint Eastwood chair for you to talk to, but one sentence for President Obama on Syria.
It's time to intervene. It's time to lead.
Please wake up.
Thank you very much.